So, you want to buy a fish farm. Most people think that means you buy some land, dig a pond, drop in a few thousand tilapia, and wait for nature to do the rest. Maybe put up a roadside sign. Sell fish by the pound to local restaurants. Collect a check every few months for doing almost nothing. Simple. Pastoral even. The fantasy is basically Old MacDonald had a farm, except the animals swim. Here's what Old MacDonald didn't tell you. Feed alone will eat 50 to 80% of every dollar you make. The electricity to keep the water oxygenated, filtered, and at the right temperature will claim another 20 to 50. Before you sell a single fish, you're already spending money faster than your tanks can fill. And unlike a regular farm, where a drought ruins a season, a fish farm can lose its entire inventory in a single afternoon, because the pump failed, the power went out, or the water chemistry shifted by a fraction of a degree. There's an industry saying that every aquaculture expert learns the hard way. Loose water or loose flow equals loose fish. And loose fish means loose money. In 2017, Cook Aquaculture's net pen near Cypress Island, Washington State, simply sagged into Puget Sound. Not because of a natural disaster, not because of a rogue wave. The nets had never been properly cleaned, and they were carrying 6 times their rated weight in marine growth. 260,000 non-native Atlantic salmon swam straight into the Pacific Ocean. The company initially blamed the solar eclipse. Regulators were not persuaded. Washington State banned Atlantic salmon farming entirely 2 years later. So here's the question this video is going to answer. If fish farming is this dangerous, this expensive, and this unforgiving, why is it a $296 billion global industry? And why do the people running it print money almost regardless of what the economy does? By the end of this, you'll know exactly how much it costs to get in at 3 different levels, where the money actually comes from. It's almost certainly not what you're imagining. And what separates the farms that survive from the ones that drain every tank and file for Chapter 11. Of course, you already have the money. Knowledge is the only thing standing between you and your future pond. So let's start with what this thing actually costs to own. Part 2. The price tag. The entry point is friendlier than you might expect. If you're thinking small, and don't mind getting your boots genuinely muddy. A basic freshwater pond operation, somewhere between 1 and 5 acres in the Mississippi Delta or rural Alabama, raising catfish the traditional way, will run you between $50,000 and $150,000 to get started. That covers digging the ponds, buying aeration equipment, stocking your first fingerlings, the juvenile fish you buy before you have anything to sell, and keeping the lights on for the first growing season. Langston University ran the numbers and pegged the minimum for a 3,000 pound per year catfish operation at around $3,000 per acre in combined startup and operating costs. So 20 acres, maybe $60,000 in, and you've got yourself a farm. Of course, you have that. Now, if that sounds too reasonable, let's talk about the middle of the market. In October 2023, Norwegian salmon company Grieg Seafood paid £50 million, roughly $63 million, to acquire Seafarm Scotland, a smaller salmon grower, specifically to gain a foothold in the Scottish market. That's the price of a functioning mid-size open water operation with existing infrastructure, licenses, and live inventory in the water. You're not building it, you're inheriting it, the good and the bad. And in this industry, the bad is almost always included at no extra charge. But here's the strange part. Even $63 million might not get you into the version of fish farming that's considered the future of the industry. For a modern, land-based recirculating aquaculture system, RAS, in industry shorthand, essentially a giant indoor self-cleaning fish tank the size of a warehouse, you're looking at a minimum of $4 to $6 per pound of annual production capacity. A facility designed to produce just 100,000 pounds of fish per year lands you somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000 before you've hired anyone or stocked a single fingerling. Atlantic Sapphire, the largest RAS salmon farm currently operating in the world, has sunk hundreds of millions of dollars into its facility near Miami, Florida. As of 2023, it was still burning through cash at a rate that made investors nervous enough to start leaving. We'll come back to that. Now, the costs nobody tells you about. You're going to need permits, plural, from multiple agencies, at multiple levels of government. At the federal level, the EPA requires a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, the NPDES, for any facility producing over 100,000 pounds of warm water fish per year. That's a water discharge permit, because your farm is essentially a point source of biological waste into local waterways. You'll also need a state-level aquaculture registration, a fish health certificate, and in many states a separate license to transport live fish across county lines. In a coastal or waterway-adjacent state, add Army Corps of Engineers oversight, tribal consultation requirements, and local zoning approval. California's Aquaculture Permit Guide lists no fewer than 8 separate agencies a typical applicant needs to coordinate with before breaking ground. The paperwork alone can take a year. And then there's the barrier that nobody outside the industry talks about. If you want to farm salmon in ocean net pens in the United States, much of the coastline is effectively closed. Washington banned Atlantic salmon net pens after the Cypress Island disaster. California, Oregon, and Alaska never allowed them. The Gulf of Mexico has a new federal permitting pathway, but it's largely untested. The result is that the most profitable species to farm, salmon, is also the one with the most restricted geography. You don't just need capital, you need location, and the good locations are either taken or regulated out of reach. So why would anyone go through all this? Because the money machine, once it's running, is unlike almost anything else in agriculture. Part 3. The money machine. Here's what most people get wrong about fish farming. They assume you make money by selling fish. You do, technically. But the operators who actually get rich aren't thinking about fish. They're thinking about feed. Specifically, they're thinking about one number, the feed conversion ratio, or FCR. It's the single most important metric in the entire industry, and understanding it explains why some farms are extraordinarily profitable and others go bankrupt while producing perfectly edible fish. FCR measures how much feed, by weight, it takes to produce 1 unit of fish. An FCR of 1.2 means you need 1.2 kilograms of feed to grow 1 kilogram of fish. That sounds simple, but the implications are staggering. Feed costs account for 50 to 70% of all operating expenses on a typical fish farm. So the game isn't really about what price you can charge for your fish. The game is about how little feed you burn getting them to weight. Let's run the single customer version of this math, because it makes the logic click. Say you're raising Atlantic salmon, and your feed costs you $1,200 per metric ton, a reasonable 2024 benchmark. Your salmon has an FCR of 1.2. To grow 1 kilogram of harvestable fish, you spend $1.44 in feed. That fish sells to a wholesaler for somewhere between $5 and $7 per kilogram, depending on market conditions and quality. After feed, you've got at least $3.56 per kilogram of margin to work with, before you touch labor, electricity, or depreciation. Now multiply that across 100 metric tons of annual harvest, that's 220,000 pounds. And your gross margin on feed efficiency alone is roughly $356,000, before you've accounted for a single other cost. Now flip it. If your FCR slips from 1.2 to 1.8, if your fish are stressed, sick, or in poorly managed water and converting feed badly, that $1.24 in feed per kilogram becomes $2.16. Your gross margin collapses by nearly $72,000 on that same 100-ton harvest, without selling a single fewer fish. The fish are the product. The feed conversion is the profit engine. This is why Mowi, the Norwegian company that is the largest salmon farmer in the world, operates differently than you might expect. They don't just farm fish, they make their own feed. In 2024, Mowi's feed division produced 585,000 metric tons of salmon feed and posted an operational profit of 62 million euros, just from the feed business. Total company revenues hit 5.62 billion euros that year on 502,000 metric tons of harvested salmon. Their cost competitiveness, as their CEO noted, comes largely from falling feed prices and relentless FCR optimization. At their scale, a 0.1 improvement in FCR across their entire fleet is worth tens of millions of euros. More on how you replicate a version of that in a moment. But first, there's something you need to understand about why so many people have tried this and failed. Part 4. The Dark Side. The costs nobody puts in the business plan first. Before a single fish gains a single gram on your farm, you are spending money. The fixed overhead on a serious RAS operation, facility lease or mortgage, specialist staff, water treatment chemicals, backup power systems, runs between $85,000 and $100,000 per month before you count feed or utilities. Your aeration pumps and filtration systems run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, because fish don't sleep, and neither does the biological cycle that keeps your water clean. Electricity for a land-based salmon farm costs between 30 cents and 50 cents per kilogram of fish produced, according to research by the Conservation Fund's Freshwater Institute. On a 100-ton operation, that's $30,000 to $50,000 in power costs every single year, just to keep the water moving. A storm knocks out your power for 8 hours, and you don't have a generator? You don't lose a day of production. You lose your entire tank. Which brings us to the two ways most fish farms fail. And they're different enough that they deserve names. Mistake 1. Underestimating the biology. In 2018, Vero Blue Farms was the darling of the American RAS industry. They operated out of Webster City, Iowa, landlocked, flat, about as far from the ocean as you can get in the continental United States, and were churning out 15,000 pounds of barramundi per week, shipping live fish to markets in New York, Boston, and Toronto. Investors poured in $63 million in debt and equity. The founding team announced plans to become North America's largest land-based fish farm. Their pitch was tight, their branding was slick, and their fish were selling. Then in November 2018, Vero Blue filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, disclosing more than $100 million in total debt, nearly all of it unsecured. The top 20 creditors alone were owed $98,943,246.22. A parallel civil lawsuit accused 5 senior executives of running at least 10 separate schemes to enrich themselves at the company's expense, including misappropriating equity, charging personal expenses to the company, and buying 6 tractor-trailers the farm didn't need for $375,000. The founders' vision of a national hub-and-spoke barramundi empire evaporated. The tanks were drained. Webster City was left holding an empty building and $276,000 in unpaid property taxes. Mistake 2. Underestimating the ocean. If Vero Blue is the story of what happens when you take the fish out of the ocean, Cook Aquaculture at Cypress Island is the story of what happens when you put them back in and then stop paying attention. On August 19, 2017, Cook's net pen near Cypress Island in Washington's Puget Sound began to fail. The nets hadn't been properly cleaned in years. Biofouling, the buildup of marine organisms on the net surface, had loaded the structure with more than 6 times its rated weight. When the tide shifted, the pen didn't hold. 263,000 non-native Atlantic salmon poured into Pacific waters. Cook's initial public response blamed the event on strong tides from a solar eclipse that had occurred 2 days earlier. A subsequent multi-agency investigation found the tides during the eclipse were actually milder than earlier in the year. The collapse was preventable. The cause was neglect. Cook paid Washington State a $332,000 environmental penalty. They settled a Clean Water Act lawsuit from the nonprofit Wild Fish Conservancy for $2.75 million, and Washington State passed legislation phasing out Atlantic salmon farming in its waters entirely by 2022. Cook didn't just lose fish. They cost the entire industry its access to one of the few viable Pacific coastline states. Here's what both of these stories tell you, and it's the most important thing in this video. Rule 1. The biology always wins. A fish farm is not a factory that happens to have animals in it. It is a living system where everything, water temperature, oxygen levels, nitrogen concentration, pH, exists in a dynamic balance that can collapse faster than you can respond. The number one reason RAS farms fail, according to the textbook Recirculating Aquaculture by Timmons, Gordat, and Vinci, is putting fish in the water before the alarm systems and backup generators are tested. Not before they're installed, before they're tested. The rule of life in fish farming: loose water or loose flow, loose fish. Rule 2. Fixed costs are your actual enemy. Feed and electricity are enormous, but they scale with production. Debt service, lease payments, and specialist labor do not. Vero Blue's $100 million in debt wasn't killing them because they couldn't sell fish. They were selling fish. It was killing them because the fixed cost floor was higher than the revenue ceiling at their production scale. A fish farm that is too small to cover its fixed costs will fail regardless of how good the fish taste. Rule 3. Maintenance is not optional. Cook's nets didn't fail because of bad luck or a rare event. They failed because cleaning them was inconvenient and expensive. And inconvenient and expensive things tend to get skipped. In an industry where a single structural failure can release 250,000 fish and end your license to operate, deferred maintenance is not a line item you can manage later. Rule 4. Your species determines your politics. Atlantic salmon is the most profitable species to farm and the most politically contentious. The Cypress Island collapse didn't just cost Cook millions. It handed environmental advocates the case study they needed to ban net pens across the Pacific coast. If you're farming salmon in open water, you are one bad headline away from a legislative problem that no amount of money can fix quickly. Now, you've done the research, you've read about Vero Blue, you've watched the Cook footage, you still want in. Let's run the math. Part 5. The payoff math. Time to pull it all together and answer the actual question. How much money do you make if you do this right? Scenario 1. The pond operation. You put $120,000 into a 20-acre catfish farm in Mississippi, $60,000 in land and pond construction, $35,000 in aeration and equipment, $25,000 in working capital. You stock hybrid catfish at current Mississippi yields of around 7,200 pounds per water acre per year, so you're targeting roughly 144,000 pounds annually. Farmgate price for catfish runs around $1.10 to $1.15 per pound at current market levels. Gross revenue, approximately $160,000. Feed and fingerling costs eat about 60%. Labor and utilities take another 20%. Debt service on a modest loan accounts for another 5%. Net profit, somewhere between $20,000 and $24,000 per year. Payback period on your $120,000 investment, 5 to 6 years. This is not a get-rich model. This is a supplemental income model, the kind of operation that makes sense if you already own Delta farmland and want to make your water acreage productive. Scenario 2. The mid-size RAS operation. You invest $600,000 in a land-based tilapia or barramundi RAS facility, targeting 100 metric tons of annual production. You've hired a farm manager at $65,000 a year and 2 technicians at $40,000 each. Your feed costs, at an FCR of 1.3 and $800 per metric ton of feed, run about $104,000 annually. Electricity at 40 cents per kilogram adds another $40,000. Facility lease or debt service, $72,000 per year. You're selling at $5 per kilogram wholesale on tilapia, or up to $8 on a premium species with direct restaurant relationships. Revenue, $500,000 to $800,000. After all costs, net operating profit of $80,000 to $150,000 per year, assuming no catastrophic mortality events and solid FCR management. Payback period, 4 to 7 years, heavily dependent on species selection and whether you're selling wholesale or direct. The operators who crack the direct-to-chef channel consistently outperform those chained to the commodity price. Scenario 3. The Empire. Mowi. 12,000 employees. 26 countries. 5.62 billion euros in revenue in 2024. Operating profit of 829 million euros. They achieved this by doing, at enormous scale, exactly what the mid-size scenario describes. Obsessing over FCR, owning their feed supply, and investing relentlessly in the unglamorous infrastructure, chillers, biofilters, ozone systems, post-smolt programs, that keeps the biology performing. The lesson isn't go build a Maui. The lesson is that the playbook is the same whether you're running 20 acres of catfish ponds or 500,000 metric tons of Atlantic salmon. The fish are the product. The feed conversion is the business. The global fish farming market is valued at $296 billion today, and is projected to hit $435 billion by 2031. Wild fisheries cannot keep up with demand. Land-based RAS is the regulatory future in most of the Western world. The operators who understand that this is a water management and feed efficiency business, not a fishing business, are quietly making fortunes while everyone else is posting Instagram photos of their ponds. Not bad for an industry where the secret to getting rich is learning to feed your fish slightly less.